Good day, everyone. I am Kyle David V. Atienza. I am a Senior Education Program Specialist in the Department of Education Schools Division of Marinduque. I will report on Module 2, the generations of distance education, specifically on the second generation of distance education. So before we proceed to our formal discussion, we have here our objectives. At the end of the discussion, you should be able to first discuss the main technologies used in the second generation of distance education, identify the pros and cons of the second generation of distance education, and lastly, recognize the importance of the second generation of distance education as a precursor of the next generation. Now, there have been numerous attempts to classify distance education in the past. Most of them classify distance education in terms of the dominant technologies used. Distance education and technologies are considered inseparable, as to reach students at a distance, one must use certain tools or technologies to do so. The term distance education may sound somehow irrelevant nowadays, as in today's education technologies, its distance nature no longer matters as much as before. What matters nowadays is the flexibility and distributed aspect of teaching and learning using different technologies. For the generations of distance education, just like what I have mentioned earlier, the history of distance education tells us the evolving use of technologies. Peters in 1994 stated that distance education has gone through three main generations. The first is the correspondence model, wherein the printed text and postal services were the primary technology used. The multimedia model, where the radio and television were invented, and the telelearning model, wherein the information communications and technology were invented. In 2005, Taylor added two more generations. That is the flexible learning, where we finally invented the internet, and the intelligent flexible learning, where we discovered the Web 2.0 or the interactive internet. For the second generation of distance education, this is characterized by the use of radio and television as instructional media in addition to print materials. In the second generation distance education, learning materials were designed based on one-way communication facilitated by the instructor. This generation is often referred to as the industrial mode of distance education because of the highly specialized division of labor in producing and delivering instructional materials and the potential to educate thousands of students at once. Unlike the first generation of distance education, wherein our primary technology is uh, print media most of the time is only created by one person. But in the second generation, we use radio and television technologies. That's why we need more than one people to facilitate and create the production of different instructional materials. Learning back then was viewed as an individual activity and was based on cognitive or behavioral theories of learning. This is based from the study of Anderson and Simpson in 2012. Although these broadcast technologies opened new doors for interaction opportunities, the interaction between the teacher and the student was kept to a minimum. This is because there is only a one-way communication during the second generation of distance education. There is no direct exchange of information between the source and the student. Most open universities, including the British Open University, the Anadolu University Open Educational Faculty in Turkey, the Korean National Open University, and the Open University of Japan, highly utilized the second generation of distance education, or were the pilot universities to implement the second generation of distance education. The second generation of distance education occurred from 1960s to 1980s. So what are the advantages of multimedia model or the second generation of distance education? First is its ubiquity. Radio and television are widely accessible mediums even in areas where other forms of communication infrastructures may be lacking. Most households have radio and televisions, making them accessible to a large portion of the population. This widespread availability ensures that educational content can reach even remote and rural areas without the need for sophisticated technology or infrastructure. Television and radio are also considered low cost compared to other instructional media such as printed materials or the face-to-face instruction, because radio and television are relatively inexpensive to produce and distribute. Once initially set up, the costs are already covered, unlike print media uh, wherein we have to buy new media every time we need new content. This cost effectiveness makes it an attractive option for delivering education to a large number of learners, especially in resource-constrained environments. The last advantage of multimedia model is its mass communication. Radio and television have the capability to reach a vast audience simultaneously. Educational programs broadcasted through these mediums can reach millions of viewers or listeners at once, making it an efficient way to disseminate information to a large number of audience. This mass communication aspect allows for scalability, enabling educational institutions to impact a broader demographic without the need for an individualized instruction. For the disadvantages, we also have three. First is the lack of interactivity. As what I have mentioned earlier, communication through radio and television is primarily one way, with limited opportunities for dialogue or interaction between the source and the learners. This lack of feedback mechanism and real-time interaction may hinder learners' ability to ask questions, seek clarification, or engage in meaningful discussions, leading to a less engaging learning experience. The next is the limited content retention. Learners may have difficulty retaining information delivered through radio and television due to the absence of interactive elements and the passive nature of this medium. The last is the broadcast constraints. Because we are using radio and television, we have broadcast schedules where learners must adhere to these schedules on the radio and television, which most of the time do not align with their individual schedules or learning preferences. This results in missed opportunities for learning and reduced flexibility in accessing educational content. So that's it. That's the second generation of distance education. What we must remember in the second generation of distance education is we primarily used television and radio communication in the delivery of education. For our points for discussion, the first is during the pandemic, the Department of Education utilized various modalities for distance learning, two of which are the radio and TV-based instructions, which we consider as the second generation of distance education. Do you think this was a better mode of learning compared to modular print, which is considered as the first generation? Why or why not? The next one is, how did the second generation of distance education, specifically through radio and television delivery, revolutionize access to education? Explore how these mediums reach remote and underserved populations. I am excited to read your responses for my points for interactions. Again, I am Kyle David Atienza, and this has been my report on the second generation of distance education. Thank you very much.